damn it.
Are you a writer geek cowboy or cowgirl who's looking for insight in how to navigate through this wonderful life we call that of a writer? Are you just an ordinary geek who likes what you like but doesn't understand how that content makes you like it? Well, partners, you've come to the right saloon. I'm writer Mark Wooden, a sci-fi wire fan creator, and this is my Thoughts from the Shed podcast. Welcome back, my writer geek friends and geek friends who like creative stuff and people who just want to know how all this creative stuff works. You're all at the right saloon. Hey, welcome back. We are going to do part 2 of Inside the Writer's Mind, where I'm going to go ahead and give you a little commentary about a fan fiction that I wrote. This fan fiction takes place in the world of Conan the Barbarian. Without further ado, because there's actually more of what I had last week now than there was last week. So we got to get cracking, get crack-a-lacking. Here's the story and some commentary. I'll catch up with you guys on the backside, because I have a lovely backside. Continuing the story. Asthera had later learned the other two women's names. Casissa claimed herself a Hycurian traveling Hyboria seeking adventure. She was a few years younger than Asthera's 21 years, but carried herself well in a fight. The girl also had an arrogance about her that reeked of royalty, though Casissa made no such claim. How noble could a Hycurian horsewoman be compared to the merchants and princes of Asthera's Argos anyway? So what have we figured out here? Asthera's 21. Cassissa's younger than her, so now we've got their ages there without just saying Cassissa is this years old and Asthera is this years old. You want to try to weave those kind of descriptions into your story. You don't want to start making a list of, oh, they're 5'10", they weigh this much, blah, blah, blah. That's great for a character sheet, like the ones I did for Shadow Dance, product blog, but not necessarily for the flow of your story. We also learned that Cassissa is arrogant, but Asthera's got a level of arrogance herself, because where she's from, there's merchants and princes, and where Cassissa's from, there's horsewomen. How could the two possibly compare? How are these two women's level of arrogance going to work against each other? I'm sure we'll find out as we progress. Rooney was older than Asthera, but not by much. I'm going to stop right there, because Rooney, all right, if you go from how noble could a horsewoman be, etc., to Rooney was older. Rooney, who the hell's Rooney? You may have forgotten what we were discussing, and that was the other two women. So Rooney, comma, the other woman who had aided Asthera. Boom, now we've defined who she is. Rooney, the other woman who had aided Asthera, was older than Asthera, but not by much. She too could hold her own in a fight. During the battle, she yelled commands to the other women as if she were an army commander. She did have the Zingarian style of enjoying the fight while taunting the enemy. A couple of things here. Now we've identified Rooney as a Zingarian. Later on in the story, I can put more about who the Zingarians are, so that makes a little bit more sense to you. But by saying that she knows her as a Asthera knows her as a Rooney as a Zingarian, and knows Cassissa as a Hyrcanian, that gives you an idea that Asthera is also well-traveled in the world because she can identify these different races. Kind of makes you wonder, how did she become a slave here? Well, that is a story for another day. The three had linked up, watching each other's backs in the weeks since the attack. Everyone left them alone, though Nazareth made a point of giving them fewer clothes than the other female slaves. The ragged garments barely covered their breasts and waists, whereas the other women had what amounted to full-body socks with ropes for belts. Again, alluding back to these are attractive women, and also alluding to the fact that Nazareth, the head guy here, is a dick. But, again, welcome to slavery. Unfortunately for those other women, they weren't as lucky to avoid Nazareth or the trustees' physical attentions. Rooney gritted her teeth every time she saw one of them dragged off to the trustees' tents high above on the pit's ground level. Words from Cassissa kept her anger at bay, as did the crack of the whip. Asthera could tell, though, in time, neither would contain the warrior within Rooney. So looking back at that paragraph, we know Nazareth and the trustees are horrible people and that they're raping the women because welcome to fucking slavery. Another little tip we got there was the dragged off to the trustees' tents high above on the pit's ground level. That tells us that the women are working down in the pit and up high are where the trustees live. That kind of sets them apart, makes them holier than thou, but it also gives us a hint of if the women want to escape, this is where they're going to have to go to do it. Back to the story. Nefera was one of the unfortunates to suffer Nazareth's sexual aggressions. A girl much younger than even Casisa, Nefera readily accepted. See, I just stumbled on the name. It's not a bad read. A girl much younger than even Casisa, Nefera readily accepted her fate as a sign from Mitra. However, she saw in Esthera, Rooney, and Casisa women who could rise above their station. In the slave tents at night, Rooney would share tales of her life before the pit, when she protected Princess Zingara before another prince betrayed and exiled her. Nefera's eyes would brighten just a touch before Nazareth called upon her. Esthera hated to see that light so quickly extinguished. So here, remember I was saying earlier, later on we could talk a little bit about Zingara and give you an idea of what that's about. Well, we did. Here's Rooney explaining that she had a life before the pit where she was a bodyguard for princes, but then was betrayed. So that gives us the idea that, you know, there's all sorts of... She rolled in the higher sect, but was a guard. So where these trustees are beating her and whipping her and all that kind of stuff, she can hold her own. Why? Because that was her life. She was a bodyguard. She did that kind of stuff. Couple of sentences, now we've got a whole backstory for Rooney. We've also introduced the character of Nefera, who is going to be our, you know, our go-to character for the empathy. Remember I was on my rant about slavery and how you can thematically say, hey, look, this is bad, and kind of give a heart and a theme and empathy from the audience for the characters in the story. Nefera is going to play that role for us. She is going to be that point of empathy. Continuing. Today, Nefera seemed particularly quiet, her slow hammering drawing the ire of a nearby trustee. Esthera moved closer to the girl and glared at the trustee. He lowered his whip and insisted Nefera pick up her pace. Esthera assured him she would make sure Nefera met her quota. The trustee eyed Esthera, though never quite connecting with her eyes, before walking away. Let's go back and look at that sentence. Esthera assured him she would make sure that's a whoop. Now, see, this is a moment where if I wanted, I can slide in some dialogue and just say she will make her quota, Esthera said, and that would kind of alleviate all that gobbledygook. Boop. And then make that a new paragraph. The trustee eyed Esthera, though never quite connecting with her eyes. Now, before this, I hadn't used any dialogue. It was just strictly, hey, let's write. Now, with the use of the dialogue, we're bringing you into the story. We're bringing you into the here and now, the present. All that stuff was kind of a flashback. It set the mood, gave you a little backstory on the characters through stuff that happened previously. And now we're being pulled into the present with that line of dialogue. That's why you have to be careful. If you start using dialogue, you're pulling them into the present. Now, if you wanted to go and still tell flashback stories, you kind of got to watch how you do that so you don't throw the reader in and out of your story. If you don't write it well, visually, it's easier to do. You have to write it just right so you understand we're now flashing back. But I'm going to keep it in the now because now it's time to start getting into the heart of this story. You shouldn't put yourself out there for me, Nefera said. You'll cross Nazareth and he will whip you again. I felt his whip before, Esthera said. Better to spare one so young as you any further pain. Nefera almost smiled, but her face quickly reset to her look of doom. Now we have a nice little exchange between the two. We can tell that Esthera is going to be caring for Nefera. Let's see how this plays out. The sound of hammers on stone, accented by the occasional whip crack, replaced the women's words as they fell into silence. The girl's troubled, a woman said in the Argesian tongue corrupted with a Zingarian accent. Esthera turned as Rooney moved within earshot of her and Nefera. What did that brute do to you? She asked Nefera. Okay, see how I had a little trouble reading that? The girl's troubled. So what I should have done was the girl is troubled. Make a new paragraph. It says, the woman who spoke spoke in the Argassian tongue? Or how about the woman who spoke had a Zingarian accent that corrupted her Argosian? Esther turned to see Rooney moving within earshot. Within earshot. Now, we've made that easier to understand. And we're going to say Rooney asked Nefera. We've made that easier to understand. We've already established that Rooney is Zingarian. So when I said Zingarian accent corrupted her Argosian, that's a kind of a clue already. The smart readers will pick up, oh, that must be Rooney, because she's the Zingarian we were talking about. And because we know that Asthera is Argosian, in order for Rooney to speak to her, she's going to have to speak Argosian. Unfortunately, in Conan, there's no like basic language like English like you have in Star Wars where everybody speaks basic so they can all talk to each other. Now in Conan, they all have different languages from all different countries. You kind of get the languages to line up so everybody can speak to everybody. And then I gave the added reality of Rooney is not a native speaker and she's got that heavy accent. So of course it's going to be kind of tense. Just like, for example, someone who's not necessarily from America or the UK who's speaking English may have that thick accent from their home country because that's just how languages work. Sure, you can cheat and just say everybody speaks the same language, don't worry about it. But hey, if you can add a little bit of something there to make it a little bit more interesting, like maybe if everybody doesn't speak the same language, later on, language will be important. They can't converse. Conflict. All I'm saying, just throwing that out there, a little bee in the bonnet. The young girl shook her head, putting her effort into her work. Casissa joined the group. She put her hand on Nefera's hammer, stopping her. Nefera looked at Casissa, saw the demand on her face. She wanted an answer. I have for an answer, but demand on her face. She wanted an answer. Turning to the other women, she, and in this case Nefera, but if I had continued that paragraph, you'd know that, saw the same determination, though Rooney at least held compassion too. With a sigh, Nefera relented. Nothing is not done before, she said. Then a conspiratorial look took her expression. It is what I heard. That got the other women's attention. The master of the pit, the real master, he is coming. Today. Cassissa's eyes narrowed. The real master? She means the bastard who owns the red pit, Rooney said. Whenever the owner shows, the trustees will be extra cruel that day to make a show for the one they call master. Noting Rooney's disgust, Asthera asked, You've been here long enough to know this? I've been around slavers long enough to know this, Rooney replied, but I also know this presents an opportunity. Asthera smiled. I knew you Zingarians were hot-blooded, but not insane. Cassissa glanced at Asthera, then back at Rooney. You're not. Seeing the determined look on Rooney's face, she drew the other two women close and said in a whisper, You're insane. So, looking back over this little passage we've got here, Zingarians were hot-blooded. Again, Asthera showing her worldly, also giving us a little backstory on Rooney's attitude and persona. Continuing on, Rooney pushed Cassissa, turning her away from her. Stay at your work. While you have dreams of escape, we can make that dream a reality, Asthera said as she returned to her hammering. Shards of rock fell to her feet, collecting among other jagged pieces on the ground. That may seem like a throwaway line to just establish, they're working and this is what their work is. But that's actually a seed that's going to come into play much, much later in the story. The shards of rock on the ground and jagged pieces on the ground. You want to plant little things like that so it's a bit of foreshadowing. So when you do something later on, it didn't just come out of the blue. You let them know it's going to happen, but you did it very, very subtly. Now, it's not subtle now because I told you. But if you were just reading that through, you may just blow that off. But now, jagged pieces. Oh, that's going to come into play later on. Think of it this way. If we were watching a movie, she'd be hitting the rock. You'd see her hit the rock. You see the shot on the ground of the jagged rocks on the ground, and it may linger for just a little bit longer, and you think to yourself, that was weird, but you'd continue on. That's the same thing I did right here. That's the literary equivalent. Continuing on. Casisa looked at Estera as if she had lost her senses. At night, when the trustees remove our ankle shackles so we can ascend the ladders, Rooney said under her breath while working, we do it. With the owner here, they'll have twice the manpower to stop us, Casisa said, still too amazed at her allies' madness to resume hammering. Which means they would never expect an escape attempt, Rooney said. She gave Casisa a determined glare. Casisa shook her head and resumed hammering. I use that determined glare thing a bit in there, or determined look in there. So what I would want to do, I won't do it now, but what I would want to do is go back and find some other way to say, to describe their expression. After a while, if even the reader starts going, wow, they must be determined if they keep having determined stares, perhaps instead of saying determined glare or determined stare, I can think about what facial expression you would have if you look determined, and then say like, okay, her eyes narrowed, or her jaw was firm, or something like that. This is just, I'm spitballing here, but that's just ideas so that way oh, she's determined, as opposed to me saying all the time, she's determined. That whole show, don't tell. Continuing on. I'd be happy just killing that bastard Nazareth, Estera said. If he gets in the way, you may taste his blood, Rooney said, but the objective must be to escape, as many of us as we can. Again, Rooney's somebody, we've learned she's a commander, she's learned she wants to defend people, she's a bodyguard, that's why she's thinking, hey, we need to save all these people, not just us. Casisa breathed heavily. She moved near Nefera. You stay close, little one. Your pain here in the pit ends tonight. An expression of relief pierced Nefera's look of doom. And that's it. That's the first chapter. Now, some of you observant viewers will probably note that this was just chapter 1 of 11. But Mark, when are you going to put the rest of the story out? Aha! The rest of the chapters are going to be an exclusive for my newsletter subscribers. So if you're already signed up for that newsletter, you'll be seeing those chapters once a month for the rest of the year, or however long it takes me to get them out, or if I decide to go 2 a month, hey, I don't know, but I'll keep you informed via the newsletter. If you're not already a subscriber to the newsletter, there's a link down below for that. What are you waiting for? You'll get updates on not only the Conan, but other fan fiction, and of course, the Shadow Dance action urban fantasy saga. Ha, you didn't think I was getting through a whole episode without mentioning that, did you? Did you? Don't forget to subscribe to YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to this dulcet sounds of my lovely voice. I hope this video gives you a little insight into the creativity and maybe even kickstarts your creativity, because hey, if I can do this, surely you can do this too. The writing part. You don't have to do all the podcasts, but the writing part. Get out there. Get your butt in the chair. Get out there. Start going. 2022. Let's make this the year even you get out there and get to writing. Which I need to go do, so excuse me for a moment. I will see all of you in 2